This weekend is MLK weekend, and today I'm going to co-preach with Dr. King. He's obviously not here, but we will allow today some of Dr. King's words to be Dr. King's words. And some of that might feel disorienting. It certainly does for me. And I don't position myself today, especially on the themes that we'll be talking about today, as an expert. I am a learner. But we felt like it was important as we entered this weekend, which has been a long tradition in the church, to celebrate Dr. King's legacy on this Sunday, to talk about some of the Jesus roots in the civil rights movement that came through Dr. King. We wanted to let his words be his words. I understand that some of his words are polarizing, some of his words are really challenging, but we will move through the morning today, and the goal of today, when you leave today, it won't feel like we wrapped it up with a bow. It won't feel like we decided anything or solved anything. The goal of today is that we leave here having conversations, that we leave here maybe feeling a little disrupted, and knowing that that's okay, and that your pastor feels a little disrupted too. Today we will start a conversation that will carry out for a long time. And what does it mean to be the people of God in this place at this time? And I think Dr. King has some wisdom to share with us around that today.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. This nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted. And every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is a faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, "My country, tears of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
4.5 years later that Dr. King's dream would have him killed. It was 4.5 years later that this movement would lead to the assassination of its most visible leader. Following Dr. King's life and this early speech in the movement is eerily similar to another story. A speech that sounded much like Dr. King's dream, a speech by a man that we talk about often here named Jesus. Jesus started a movement with a very similar speech of proclaiming a future free of oppression that also eventually got him murdered and killed as well. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus' speech opens up this way: "Happy are people who are hopeless. Happy are people who are grieved." What a ridiculous statement to make. What a ridiculous way to open up a speech. But what Jesus is doing is describing a future he's dreaming of. What Jesus is doing in the Sermon on the Mount is describing his dream for this world that his Father created. Matthew chapter 6, let me read this to us starting in verse 3. "Happy are people who are hopeless, because the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Happy are people who grieve, because they will be made glad. Happy are people who are humble, because they will inherit the earth. Happy are people who are hungry and thirsty for righteousness, because they will be fed until they are full. Happy are people who show mercy, because they will receive mercy. Happy are people who have pure hearts, because they will see God. Happy are people who make peace, because they will be called God's children. Happy are people whose lives are harassed because they are righteous, because the kingdom of heaven is theirs. See, part of being a Christian, part of being a follower of Jesus is seeing a future. It's seeing a different future. It's dreaming of a future that is free of oppression. It's dreaming of a future that is liberating not just for some people, but for all people. This means that for us today, part of our work in being the church is to understand the oppressive realities of the world we live in now and working toward a different reality for tomorrow. This has been the Jesus movement for thousands of years. This is a really, really important intersection of the church, telling the truth about today while working for a different reality tomorrow. It's easy for us to, I think, at least for me, to hear Dr. King's speech and think it's about a different place. It's certainly in a different time, but it's also easy to think that this was primarily happening in the South. After all, we live in Michigan, right? We were a part of the Underground Railroad. We were part of helping so many of escapees from the South receive their freedom. But while this speech is happening, literally while this speech is happening, there were some oppressive realities in Jackson County as well. I had part of my work as a pastor, especially as a pastor coming to a new place, is to understand the place in which we inhabit. See, I don't believe the work of the church should ever be severed from the ground. I think there's a theology of the soil that we must embody and contain, and our history is a part of that. So in part of my research and trying to understand this place I now live, this place where I'm now called to be a pastor, has been digging into all kinds of things, like watching some very poorly made city council meetings on Facebook. This past June, Councilor John Willis gave a presentation about the history of this place, about Jackson County in the 60s. And in that presentation, I got to put my eyes on a land covenant that was from 1962. That there were parts of Jackson County that stated in the law was that this land must never be sold, except to people from Caucasian descent. 1962, Jackson County. In 1968, up until 1968, there was a residential security map. And this residential security map portioned off parts of Jackson County and labeling different parts of the county, and especially different parts of the city, as being A, B, C, or D. The A areas were parts of the county that were believed to be rising in value. And the D areas were parts of the county that were believed to be decreasing in value. Except the way the map works was based on proximity to what is described in the document as undesirables. Undesirables. Later in the document, this word is defined as aliens and Negroes. Aliens meaning immigrants, and Negroes meaning black people. So the closer you live to the communities inhabited by immigrants and black people, the less your property was worth. To make matters more difficult, it was this document that the lending parties of our county would use to decide whether or not someone could pull equity and gain equity in their home. Why is this important to us? It's important to us because when we drive through parts of our community and we see parts of our community that seem like they've been disinvested in, or we see parts of our community that feel more run down than other parts of our community, as followers of Jesus, what we should not do is jump to quick conclusions. What we should do is ask why. Why is this part of the community seem more run down than another part of the community? Why does this part of the community not have a grocery store while my community has 3? Why does this part of the community have access to health care while my part of the community has access to health care? Why is it that this elementary school consistently scores lower than the elementary school in my neighborhood? Why? Why is it this way? Why is it this way? When we are voting new laws into our community, and we begin to pay attention to things like where new roads are being built, why is it this community is being displaced versus my community being displaced? It was in the 60s that across the U.S. there was this urban renewal movement. Well, that movement found itself in Jackson County as well. You might have driven on Cooper Street before. Cooper Street was extended in the 60s as a part of this urban renewal and was drove in the south part of town right through a historic black community. As a part of the development in Jackson County, 278 families were displaced. 250 of those families were black or African American. This is why, as followers of Jesus, we should pay attention when there's changes happening in our city. Again, why is this important? Is I really believe that God is raising up a church who are paying attention to things in the way of Jesus. A community of followers of Jesus who are looking to learn, repent, and repair forms of systematic oppression in the name, in the way of Jesus. I think what is so beautiful and so Jesus-centered about the vision and the dream that Dr. King had for the world is that he believed in a world that was to be liberation for all people, the oppressed and the oppressors. He says in his speech, the marvelous new militancy that has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced in their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up in our destiny. They have come to realize that their freedom is bound to our freedom. This point is deeply rooted in the way and mission of Jesus. In a few moments, I want to continue to talk about what this might mean for us. But I wanted to pause there for a minute to just let that rest and sit.
There's a world at war, caught in suffering, silent casualties. Oh, God, grant us peace. In these sleepless nights, I can hardly breathe. Despite brutality, I know that we'll be free. I know that we'll be free. So let the light keep it shining. Let it break into the darkness. All the love dares us to see. We'll all be free. In these desperate times, love will hold us here. Love will join our hearts, teach us to have no fear. So we lay our head down to wash their feet. When we see our brother, oh, we'll all be free. Yes, we'll all be free. Keep it shining, let it break into the darkness. All the love dares us to see, we'll all be free. Set the light and keep it shining, let it break into the darkness. All the love dares us to see, we'll all be free. Let it break into the darkness. All the love dares us to see, we'll all be free. Let the light keep it shining. Let it break into the darkness. All the love dares us to see, we'll all be free. Free will. Free. Hey. Tell your sister, tell your brother, tell your father, tell your mother, tell yourselves, tell everybody, we'll all be free. Tell the lovers, tell the haters, tell the prisoners, tell the jailers, tell the world, tell everybody, we'll all be free. Tell your sister, tell your brother, tell your father, tell your mother, tell yourselves, tell everybody, we'll all be free. Tell the lovers, tell the haters, tell the prisoners, tell the jailers, tell the world, tell everybody, we'll all be free.
It was 4 months before Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech that he's in a jail cell on Good Friday, that the article that you just read about was published in a local newspaper, signed by white local clergymen, urging Dr. King to call back the movement, urging Dr. King to be patient and allow the new laws that were forming to work themselves out in society. This theme is actually throughout the Jesus story as well. This theme is throughout Jesus' teaching that there's a certain privilege we have when we are distant from suffering to be patient in changing the things that cause that suffering. Maybe none more pointed than one of Jesus' last parables in Matthew chapter 25. In Matthew chapter 25, before Jesus is about to move on from his disciples, he shares this parable about sheep and goats. And in his parable, he says, at the end of time, the end of all time, God will gather the nations before him. And he will separate the nations into two categories, sheep and goats. I want to read the next parts of this parable because Jesus' words are certainly stronger than mine. It says, then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who will receive the good things from my Father. Inherit the kingdom that was prepared for you before the world began. I was hungry, and you gave me food to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothes to wear. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Then those who are righteous will reply to him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you? or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you as a stranger and welcome you, or naked and give you clothes to wear? When did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" Then the king will reply to them, "I assure you that when you have done it for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you have done it for me." Then he will say to those on his left, "Get away from me, you will receive terrible things. Go into the unending fire that has been prepared for the devil and his angels. I was hungry, and you gave me no food to eat. I was thirsty, and you didn't give me anything to drink. I was a stranger, and you didn't welcome me. I was naked, and you didn't give me clothes to wear. I was sick and in prison, and you didn't visit me." Then they will reply, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or stranger or naked or sick or in prison and didn't do anything to help you?" Then he will answer, "I assure you that when you haven't done it for one of the least of these, you haven't done it for me." And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous will go into eternal life. See, the call of unity, this letter from the white clergymen, has some sympathy in it, right? There's some sympathetic language in it. There's a sense that they are still for the civil rights movement, but there's a real lack of solidarity in the letter, right? There's sympathy for it, but there's a lack of solidarity with the people most affected by the oppressive systems of the time. The same is true in Matthew 25. The goats are sympathetic to what Jesus is saying. "Jesus, when did we see you hungry or thirsty?" "Jesus, certainly if we knew that you were in prison, we would have visited you." "Certainly we would think that it would not be right, Jesus, for you to suffer in this way." We have sympathy for that. But what's amazing is the sheep have the exact same response as the goats. "Jesus, when did we see you hungry or thirsty? When were you in prison? When were you naked and we clothed you?" What Jesus is pointing at here is there's this certain urgency. There's a certain urgency that exists when we live in proximity to and in solidarity with those who are suffering. Certainly, if your child was suffering, you would do something, right? Certainly, if your parent was suffering, you would do something, right? Certainly, if your closest friend was suffering, you would do something, right? This is the point Jesus is trying to make, that his movement, his people, have a sense of solidarity with those who receive the least amount of good news, which creates a sense of urgency to change the things that prolong suffering. I grew up in my early days of Sunday school after my family started going to church, and I remember this really weird song we used to sing. Anyone remember, "I just want to be a sheep, ba, 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 ba. I just want to be a sheep, ba, 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 ba. Pray the Lord my soul to keep. I just want to be a sheep, ba." I mean, I thought it was kind of like a weird song. It is a weird song, right? And the song goes on like, "I don't want to be a hypocrite." Because the hypocrites aren't hip with it, right? We don't want to be a hypocrite. And they'll go on, "I don't want to be a Pharisee," because the Pharisees aren't fair, you see, right? So this was the song. And this cute song was, "I just want to be a sheep, ba, 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 ba." And as I read the way of Jesus, I do want to be a sheep. This is the group I want to be a part of. This is what's so compelling about the way of Jesus, is that Jesus stands in solidarity with those who receive the least amount of good news. Black author and activist Dante Stewart writes this about sympathy and solidarity. "This is why I say the struggle for justice, dignity, power, and community means we must move from sympathy to solidarity. Sympathy feels bad about a situation. Solidarity joins as a co-laborer to change the situation. Sympathy calls for love without risk. Solidarity calls for risk as love. Sympathy centers the comfort and timetable of those who benefit from a system of difference. Solidarity calls for a revolution of value in a system in which we build a loving and just common life together. May it be so. This is the work Jesus is doing. And if Matthew 25 teaches us anything, is that we can find Jesus where he told us we can find him. In prison, with the sick, with the naked, with the poor, with the oppressed, those who struggle generation after generation after generation. Jesus is telling us we can find him with the disenfranchised, the suffering, the disinvested, which I think leads us to some questions, not answers. I think the questions I hope we leave here today is, am I willing to find Jesus in solidarity with the poor, the oppressed, and the marginalized? Which I think continues to lead us to ask more questions. Am I willing to see injustices? Like, do I even want to know? Do I even want to see it? Do I even want to consider why things are the way they are? So we must learn to ask questions. Why is it this way? How did it come to be like this? In what ways do I benefit from this system? In what ways am I complicit with this system? In a moment here, we're going to hear MLK's response to the white clergyman. Words he wrote while sitting in a jail cell, while his black brothers and sisters and some other allies were being brutalized for his dream, a dream of a world that is equitable, a dream of a world that practices equality, a dream of a world that practices a radical inclusion. A letter that is responding to MLK and his movement being asked just to wait, be patient, your time will come, eventually this will be made right. I think in this letter you can hear, we'll read and we'll hear the agony of the struggle, a sentiment that can be found all throughout the scriptures in places like Psalm 13. How long will you forget me, Lord? Forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long will I be left to my own wits, agony filling my heart daily? How long will my enemy keep defeating me? After MLK speaks, there'll be a song that plays and the lights will come up and the doors will open and you're free to leave at your own pace today. And I'd encourage you not to try and leave today with quick answers, fast solutions, but to leave with questions and wrestling, to carry these conversations into your car ride home, to the lunches that you have, and that we could extend this conversation through our long future together, asking what it means to be a faithful church in the way of Jesus at this time, in this place, with these people. I'll also note that everything I've referenced today, we've made a place online that you can find all that stuff. If you go to westwinds.org/MLK, everything I've talked about today, there's lots of articles and references there, which could be a helpful talking point for you and your household or with your friends, where you could just grab something from that site, read it together, talk about it, and keep having conversations. I again today was so nervous to move through this talk today. This is a scary thing for a new pastor, to talk about something as complicated, as nuanced as this conversation. I'm a learner with y'all. I'm on this journey too. But I want nothing more. I want nothing more than to see Jesus' church be faithful here in Jackson County. And that might mean, no, that does mean opening our eyes to the things going on around us and being open to the things that God may call us to. I don't know what those are, but we will move faithfully through this season and through this place with these people. So we finish today with MLK's letter from Birmingham jail, one of his most challenging reads, written in response to clergymen asking him to wait on Good Friday of all days, a day that recognizes the day that Jesus the revolutionary was murdered for his dream. MLK writes this letter in response. Let's read and hear this letter today and leave slowly as music plays.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly, affects all indirectly. Just as Socrates felt that it was necessary to create a tension in the mind so that individuals could rise from the bondage of myths and half-truths to the unfettered realm of creative analysis and objective appraisal, we see the need for nonviolent gadflies to create the kind of tension in society that will help men rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood. I have never yet engaged in a direct action movement that was well timed, according to the timetable of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with a piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. It has been a tranquilizing thalidomide, relieving the emotional stress for a moment, only to give birth to an ill-formed infant of frustration. We must come to see with the distinguished jurist of yesterday that justice too long delayed is justice denied. We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed toward the goal of political independence, and we still creep at horse and buggy pace toward the gaining of a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. Perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, brutalize, and even kill your black brothers and sisters with impunity, when you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see the tears welling up in her little eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and see the depressing clouds of inferiority begin to form in her little mental sky, and see her begin to distort her little personality by unconsciously developing a bitterness toward white people, when you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son who is asking in agonizing pathos, "Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean?" When you are harried by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro, living constantly at tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next, and plagued with inner fears and outer resentments. When you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over, and men are no longer willing to be plunged into an abyss of injustice where they experience the bleakness of corroding despair. I hope you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. In the midst of a mighty struggle to rid our nation of racial and economic injustice, I have heard so many ministers say, those are social issues with which the gospel has no real concern. And I have watched so many churches commit themselves to a completely otherworldly religion which made a strange distinction between body and soul, the sacred and the secular. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace which is the absence of tension to a positive peace which is the presence of justice, who constantly says I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of good will is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities, and in some not too distant tomorrow the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all of their scintillating beauty.